Canada leaves the United States without electricity. Can you imagine waking up and discovering that millions of homes in the United States are without power because of a decision made in Canada? What led Canadians to take this extreme measure? Is this the first sign of a silent energy war between allies? Something serious is happening, and this blackout could be just the beginning. Let's take a look at how it all started, who is really behind this strategic move, and why you could be affected, even if you live thousands of miles away. The trade relationship between Canada and the United States has been the backbone of North America's economy for decades. But today that stability wavers in an unexpected twist. Amid increasingly aggressive tariff tensions, Canada has issued a threat that could shake the very foundations of the region. If President-elect Donald Trump does not revoke the imposed tariffs, the country will drastically cut off the supply of electricity and crude oil to the United States. Can you imagine a winter without power or fuel for millions of homes? Bold declarations such as, "New York gets most of the electricity we, Canadians, supply. Let's see what they do when we cut it off," have resounded in Ottawa, creating both intrigue and alarm. In this video, we'll dive into the full extent of this energy dependency and explore the devastating consequences that even a partial or total cut could bring. The controversy began after the imposition of tariffs by the Trump administration, which negatively impacted various Canadian exports. Feeling that its economic interests and sovereignty are under threat, Canada has decided to respond forcefully by cutting the flow of two critical resources for the United States: electricity and crude oil. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the news that traditional media outlets are hiding from you. Let's continue. First, it's important to highlight the role that energy exports play in the bilateral relationship. Canadian provinces such as Ontario and Quebec supply an essential portion of the electricity consumed by northeastern U.S. states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. It's estimated that up to 85% of the electricity imported by the United States comes from Canada, and approximately 20% of consumption in key states depends on this supply. Thus, if Canada were to suspend these exports starting March 15th, as announced by the government, around 12 million American households would be affected, facing massive blackouts, loss of heating during winter, and subsequent concerns for safety and quality of life. But the Canadian threat doesn't stop at electricity. It also concerns crude oil, a resource on which U.S. refineries in the Midwest and Texas heavily depend. Approximately 60% of the crude oil imported by the United States comes from Canada, roughly equating to about 4 million barrels per day. Of that amount, 90% is used to fuel the country's strategic refineries. An interruption in this supply would not only cause shortages at the refineries, but could also send gasoline prices soaring to unsustainable levels for consumers. A member of the Canadian cabinet stated emphatically, "Our crude will not flow to the United States until the tariffs are revoked." This declaration makes it clear that Canada plans to use its energy capacity as a tool for political and economic pressure, by, according to some sources, reducing flow by up to 50% through valve shutdowns and intermittent cuts. The strategy is twofold: to directly punish the United States and to force the U.S. government to reconsider its tariff policy to avoid consequences that could lead to a collapse in essential sectors. The repercussions of these measures extend far beyond the energy sector. The commercial interdependence between Canada and the United States is striking. Both countries engage in over $800 billion of annual trade. This relationship includes not only electricity and oil, but also steel, aluminum, critical defense minerals, and other essential inputs for various high-tech industries. For instance, Canada is one of the world's leading producers of raw aluminum, and many of its minerals are crucial to the Pentagon's operations. Any disruption in these supplies could trigger a chain reaction, impacting manufacturing, construction, the automotive industry, and other sectors. the effect on the petroleum industry is particularly severe. Without Canadian crude, current U.S. oil reserves, estimated at approximately 580 million barrels, would only last for 90 days. This force scarcity would set off a domino effect in U.S. refineries, driving gasoline prices to skyrocket and disrupting logistical operations nationwide. Midwestern refineries, which handle a significant portion of the oil processing, could collapse within weeks if there's a substantial drop in supply. This would not only affect end consumers, but also lead to an employment crisis in the industry, with thousands of jobs at risk. Another critical aspect of the Canadian threat is its effect on the domestic supply chain. Electricity and oil form the basis of an extensive network of logistical operations. For example, without Canadian-generated power, entire regions in the northwestern United States could suffer massive blackouts, impacting everything from hospital operations and public transportation to the operational capacity of critical industries. It is estimated that such an energy shortfall could cost the industry around $550 billion per month. These disruptions would not only elevate operating costs, but also undermine the competitiveness of the United States in the global market. Furthermore, the threat extends to the automotive sector. With 60% of U.S. oil coming from Canada and significant electricity imports as well, dependency on these resources is vital for the functioning of refineries and, by extension, for gasoline prices. Experts warn that a total or substantial reduction in supply could cause a sharp increase in gasoline prices, directly impacting consumers' pockets and the production capacity of refineries and auto manufacturers. This scenario might force the already uncertain automotive industry to scale back operations and even cut jobs, affecting the entire value chain. The Canadian retaliatory measures could also have a strong geopolitical component. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has made it clear that his government will utilize every available tool to respond to what he considers an aggressive U.S. policy. In public statements, Trudeau argued that the tariffs not only affect Canadian exports, but also constitute a direct threat to his country's sovereignty and economic stability. Moreover, there has even been talk, almost in an ironic tone, of forming an anti-Trump commercial bloc together with Mexico, which would leave the United States without the crude oil and energy coming from both Canada and Mexico. This strategic move could reconfigure the trade balance in the region, weakening the U.S. position and forcing it to seek new alliances and energy sources. Canada's response has also extended to the transportation and distribution sphere. Reports have been published concerning the possibility that the flow of crude oil could be reduced by 50% through the partial shutdown of strategic valves. These intermittent cuts would not only affect the availability of oil in U.S. refineries, but would also trigger a global price escalation, making gasoline reach record-high prices per gallon. At a time when stability in the energy market is crucial to the economy, the threat of a total or partial cut represents an enormous risk to U.S. competitiveness. It is essential to emphasize that the energy interdependence between Canada and the United States is not a new phenomenon. For years, both countries have mutually relied on their energy resources to sustain growth and maintain a balance in their economies. With its abundant supply of oil and electricity, Canada has established itself as one of the United States' main trading partners. This has allowed strategic regions, such as the Northeast and the Midwest, to benefit from a constant source of energy. However, the recent tariff tensions have jeopardized this delicate equilibrium, and Canada's decision to cut these exports would be a drastic measure that could irreversibly alter this relationship. Remember, if you don't want to be the only one missing out on everything that's coming up, subscribe to the channel. Let's keep going.
I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If necessary, if the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off.
Experts warn that an interruption in the Canadian energy supply could have devastating consequences. It is estimated that if Canada were to suspend 100% of its exports of electricity and oil, the impact on the U.S. economy would be catastrophic. Billions of dollars in losses, a vertiginous surge in gasoline and electricity prices, and a deceleration in industrial production. Moreover, the threat of massive blackouts in regions that rely almost entirely on Canadian electricity would create an atmosphere of uncertainty affecting both private investment and consumer confidence. Another factor to consider is the possible long-term repercussion on bilateral trade. The United States and Canada maintain one of the closest trade relationships in the world, with an annual exchange exceeding $800 billion. An escalation in the dispute, with retaliatory measures that include cutting off energy, could reduce this trade by up to 40%, plunging both countries into a severe recession. In Canada, it is estimated that 500,000 jobs would be lost, and that the impact would affect approximately 5% of its gross domestic product, while in the United States inflation could skyrocket to 7%, putting at risk the stability of multiple economic sectors. Furthermore, the impact of these measures would extend throughout the entire supply chain. The manufacturing industry, for example, depends greatly on the availability of electricity and oil. Without these resources, the production of automobiles, machinery, and consumer goods would be seriously compromised. The consequences would be especially notable in sectors such as construction, technology, and logistics services, which already face challenges to remain competitive in an increasingly globalized market. A cut in Canadian energy would not only paralyze industrial operations, but also generate a domino effect impacting supply and demand on a global scale, raising costs and reducing productive capacity. Canada's response also carries significant geopolitical implications. In a context where controversial ideas are being discussed about integrating Canada as state number 51 in the American Union, the retaliatory measures take on a defensive and national affirmation hue. Trudeau has made it clear that Canada will not allow unilateral policies to affect its sovereignty or compromise the stability of its economy. The threat to cut off the energy supply is therefore framed within a broader strategy to negotiate better trade conditions and protect Canadian interests on the international stage. Moreover, the interrelation between energy and the manufacturing industry means that the reach of these measures will be felt both regionally and globally. Steel, aluminum, and various minerals critical for defense and technology, most of which are supplied by Canada, would also be affected in a chain reaction of retaliations that could considerably decrease the productivity of key sectors of the U.S. economy. The possibility that the production chain could be abruptly interrupted has set off alarms in multiple business environments, and projections indicate that the losses stemming from this scenario could reach historic figures. Trudeau's decision to use energy as a commercial weapon demonstrates the fragility of North America's energy interdependence, a relationship once considered unbreakable for decades. Measures such as suspending exports from Ontario and Quebec and the possibility of redirecting crude oil to Chinese markets aim to weaken the American position and reconfigure bilateral trade relations. The impact of these retaliatory measures extends to nearly every sector of the U.S. economy, from the automotive and manufacturing industries to transportation and basic services. With bilateral trade exceeding $800 billion, any disruption in the energy flow would jeopardize the supply of essential goods and undermine the country's competitiveness and financial stability. Moreover, the possibility of Canada forming an anti-Trump commercial bloc with Mexico increases uncertainty, potentially triggering an escalation of conflict. The question is inevitable. Will Canadian retaliations force a change in U.S. policy, or will they precipitate a continental crisis? One thing is certain: every decision made in Ottawa will have direct repercussions on the lives of millions. Your opinion is essential in this debate. Leave us your comments and subscribe so that, together, we can drive the real change that this country demands.